Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says, if you believe something can be broken, you also must believe it can be fixed. That's the central message of Rosh Hashanah and these Yamim Noraim. Many of us feel a little broken, some of us more than a little. But we can heal, we can grow. As with our community, our city, our country, our world, if we acknowledge the fractures and the failures, we must also accept the possibility of healing and of wholeness. That's why the shofar that we'll hear tomorrow cycles through wholeness to brokenness, but always back to tekiyah, to the single whole note. The new year honors our joy, but it holds us through our pain until hopefully the pain begins to subside and our joy prevails. Now you may be thinking, those are some nice words, Rabbi Burg, but have you been paying attention? Have you seen the state of things? What universe are you talking about? And yes, I have, and yes, I get it. The world's a mess. And COVID threw a toxic cocktail of bad luck and bad actors, ignorance, willful and otherwise, appears unwilling to let us go just yet. Tomorrow, I'll talk about this year, 5782, and what it can mean for our community, how to joyfully and safely re-engage in this space and also with one another beyond these walls, how to act when the virus makes re-entry more difficult than most any of us thought it would. But also, as we re-enter, how will we honor the trauma of these past 18 months, not to mention the months and the years before that? Tomorrow, we'll talk about coming home. This evening, however, I want to revisit a melody that, given what's transpired since, may feel like I first shared it with you a lifetime ago, 8 years ago, 5774, on Yom Kippur, just before Yizkor. I mentioned that Rabbi Nachman teaching. If you believe something can be broken, you must also believe that it can be fixed. And I taught you a melody of mine to words from Psalm 118. Words will intone just before sounding the shofar tomorrow morning. Hameitzar karatia Hanani v'merchavyo min Hameitzar karatia Hanani v'merchavyo. Out of the narrow straits, I've called out to God, and God answers me with abundance. Hameitzar, from tsar. The word tsar is deeply resonant in Jewish tradition. Mitzrayim, Egypt, in Hebrew, is from tsar. Our people were enslaved in a narrow place. That's the Hameitzar of the psalmist. We cry out from the dire straits, from oppression, and God responds from the merchav, the wide place, the wilderness, the expanse. Tzara, another word derived from tsar, means distress. You might know the Yiddish word tsuris. But tsar also means to mold. It means to shape. We're formed by our birth mother in the narrowness, the womb, a constricted, lightless, but also generative place. It's safe and it's warm. It's not oppressive like Egypt, but it's also not where we're meant to remain. In this conception, passing through the Sea of Reeds is our birth canal, if you will. The Midbar, the wilderness, is about weaning, and the Promised Land is about our growing up. What then is the role of the liberated? Whether a literal human baby or in the metaphor as it applies to our deliverance, do we have agency in our own liberation? What's our role in reaching the expanse? I think of the well-known phrase in June Jordan's poem for South African women that concludes, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And why not? There's evidence that babies play an instrumental role in their own birth, in bringing about their own delivery. And the Egyptian exodus only occurs when the Hebrews cry out in anguish, Vayishma Elohim et na'akatam. Our groaning under Pharaoh's thumb precipitates God's response. Min Hameitzar karatia Anani v'mirchavya Min Hameitzar karatia Anani v'mirchavya. So, there are two interrelated but different experiences of tsar, and I think it's important to separate them out. Tomorrow, I want to consider more deeply the first version, the narrowness of trauma and isolation, and how we can discover joy despite real challenges. But this evening, I want to share a story of formation, not in the womb, but as it relates to accountable, even sacred communities, because that tsar, that gestation, that forms human beings into holy collectives, doesn't require revolution. It requires love and compassion and kindness. This is a story of two men, a doctor and a politician, and a little girl who inspired them both. But this story of kindness really begins a generation earlier with tragedy, with the family of Edward Jayevsky fleeing Nazi Germany for Argentina, and then emigrating to the United States and settling in Anaheim, California. And then more tragedy. Edward, who had become a doctor of holistic medicine, was on vacation with his family when a car accident claimed the life of his 6-year-old daughter, Natasha. The family was overcome with grief, as you could imagine, but when they began to go through her things, they found all these drawings and writings about compassion. She would draw rainbows, and along the rainbow's curve, she wrote messages like, "Put your heart into kindness." So Natasha's father, Edward, created a poster, and he hung colorful art around Anaheim with the message, "Make kindness contagious." Now enter a city councilman named Tom Tate, who saw these posters and was struck by their simplicity and their beauty. No one claimed responsibility, no corporation had sponsored or branded the message. The only attribution was the scrawl of a child's handwriting at the bottom, "My wish is to help people, NJ." NJ, Tom discovered after some investigation, was Natasha Jayevsky, and he learned her story. And he was so touched by this little girl's message, particularly against the backdrop of political discourse that was, and certainly has become, increasingly vitriolic. And so 6 years later, there was a vacancy in the mayor's office in Anaheim, and Tom decided to run on a platform of kindness, and he won by a substantial margin. Tom's contention was that cities could heal through the power of kindness. Now, here's the place where we might start to get a little cynical, especially if you agree with Timothy Egan's recent claim in the Times that America is getting meaner. But Tom's vision of a city animated by kindness proved both viable and actually effective. He asked the question, could kindness lead people in the sprawling car culture of Southern California to get to know their neighbors? He created an initiative called simply Hi Neighbor. He wrote a note to others on his own block and made copies. "Hi neighbor, I think it's important that we meet so that we can look out for one another." He and his wife slipped this note under each neighbor's door with an invitation to come by their home. Almost all of them did, and relationships were formed. You may recall a few years ago, In4Of spearheaded a Say Hi campaign of our own, encouraged by a neighbor here in Reservoir Hill who was tired, frankly, of too many Beth Amers coming on the high holy days, parking in the neighborhood, and not bothering to say hello. I can tell you that this simple act of chesed, saying hello, really makes a difference. So Tom Tate got going on his kindness campaign, and he launched the Million Acts of Kindness initiative in the Anaheim School District. Each school set ambitious goals for kind acts, and when they met those milestones, they would hold a school assembly to celebrate. When they met the district-wide goal of 1 million acts of kindness, the demonstrable results of Tom's efforts were clear. Bullying in the school was dramatically reduced, as it was throughout the district. Suspensions were cut in half. Then Tom and the city leadership applied kindness thinking to the opioid crisis, moving away from punitive measures for drug use toward treatment and harm reduction. Everything gets better if everyone is a little bit kinder, said Tom. And it's true, right? One of many students affected by Tom's vision was a kid named Sean Oliu, whose worldview was shaped by Tom's talk one day at his elementary school. A few months after the mayor's visit, Sean won something called La Voz Kids, a Spanish-language version of The Voice, sponsored by Telemundo. His reward was $4,000, but instead of buying stuff for himself, as many tweens might have done, he wanted to do something kind for others. He used the money to create a music program at his school, which until that point didn't have one. Later, he spearheaded what became an annual fundraiser called Kids Giving Back. They've raised over $60,000, and now 28 schools in the area offer music education for their students. Tom's efforts to make Anaheim into a city of kindness led to visits around the world with mayors of other cities looking to tap into the power of compassion to keep their communities safe and resilient. The U.S. State Department even invited him to speak on behalf of its Bureau of Counterterrorism to officials in Germany. The topic was, I'm not kidding, countering extremism through kindness. Tom recalls one conversation with a former neo-Nazi in Dusseldorf who explained that while it was his search for connection that led him to join a white supremacist group in the first place, it was unexpected acts of kindness by the very people he had been taught to hate that convinced him how wrong he had been. Kindness is contagious, read the poster created by Dr. Edward Jayevsky. Indeed, a simple and pure act of a 6-year-old girl inspires her grieving father to share her message of compassion with the city. A politician struggling to move that same city toward a sustainable and achievable vision of collective responsibility stumbles upon those posters and runs for mayor. Over several years, a city is transformed into a safer and more compassionate place. That same politician travels to Europe and meets a young man whose toxic worldview has been challenged by kindness. The same place which Natasha Jayevsky's family 2 generations earlier had to flee because of that same ideology. As Anne Frank, another girl who died tragically and too young, once wrote, "In the long run, the sharpest weapon of all is a kind and gentle spirit." The slings and arrows of cruelty or apathy are best defeated by the precise deployment of kindness. If you believe something can be broken, you also must believe it can be fixed. If you believe it can be fixed, you'd better participate in the act of relocating from the Hameitzar to the Merchav. Min Hameitzar karati anani v'merchavya min Hameitzar karati anani v'merchavya. I call out from the narrowness. God helps me to find answers and comfort in the expanse. This new year will be a year of coming home. It may not happen as quickly or as linearly as we had hoped. We will wait for boosters, for child vaccinations, for more vax mandates, for better positivity rates, for a bit more sanity. But the Hameitzar will subside, and the mirchav will eventually prevail. And meanwhile, as we come home, Beth Am is committed to creating an effective container for our own expressions of chesed, of kindness for one another. Building on years of wonderful work by Joyce Keating, Barbara Rosenberger, and others, Aimee Adashek is coordinating the next iteration of our C2C, congregant to congregant group. There will be more opportunities to support Beth Amers in need, to celebrate their smachot, to generally check in with each other during these difficult times. Tsar, narrowness, is one conception, or in one conception, is about formation. The biological process of fashioning a life within a human body is complex, dare I say miraculous. But the critical piece is this: there are no expectations, no transactions. Growing a life is an act of grace, of patience, and yes, of kindness. Raising kids is too. Raising teenagers definitely is. When I first taught my Min Hameitzar melody, Julian Krolik and Renee Feller helped me lead a 3-part round. Remember that? Eliyahu was 8 years old, and Shamir was 5. Today, Eli's 16, and Shamir is 13, and I've asked them to come and make some music with me. So whether you're here in our historic sanctuary or davening with us from home, I hope that you'll sing along with us. Not all broken things become whole, but believing that they can be, being kind enough to ourselves to consider the possibility of healing is the only way that we're going to claw our way out of this moment. The Kotzker Rebbe taught that there is nothing so whole as a broken heart. Perhaps that's because the fullest hearts have all been broken at some point. The new year is upon us. The journey of homecoming is before us. The expanse is awaiting us. Let's make it a little sweeter for one another. Shana Tova u'metuka, may it be a sweet new year for all of us.
Min Hameitzar karatia Hanani v'merchavia. Min Hameitzar karatia Hanani v'merchavia. Min Hameitzar karatia Anani v'merchavia. Min Hameitzar karatia Anani v'merchavia. Min Hameitzar karatia Hanani 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 v'merchavia. Min Hameitzar karatia
Tova.